So, hello everyone. At the beginning I would like to apologize because I don't speak Italian really well, so I think I keep it in English today. Maybe next time I will learn some proper language. My name is Kavan, I'm from the Czech Republic, and today I would like to talk to you about the myth, legends and tourism in our upcoming psychological horror game called Someday You'll Return. I would like to just very quickly tell you a couple of things about myself, because I actually, at the beginning of my life, always wanted to be a cello player. And this is what I did for a lot of years, so I was just a cellist. And then I found out how much money can cellists get, and so I decided to do other things too. So I ended up doing multiple things at once, and basically the beauty about video games is that now I can do all these things back in one place. I started in the game industry in 2002. I was doing first some soundtracks for independent games like Darkfall and Barrow Hill and stuff like that, so it was very early years. And very early I decided I want to make my own games too. So in 2006, after some failed attempts, I started a CBE software as an independent duo team. So we are just two people in the team with Lukáš Medek, who is sadly not here. We worked, I worked on 15 plus published games outside CBE software, because this were things which I was either programming, doing sound design, music, stuff like that. And in CBE, I do a lot of stuff, so that's basically what's happening. We created a couple of games till this day, which allowed us basically to start with this horrible monster we are doing now, which is called Someday You'll Return. And as I kind of told you, it's basically a game done by two people, so maybe if there is something you think in the AAA industry looks better or more polished, we apologize, we're just two for that. Apart from our game, I'm also a co-founder of a for me, very nice Facebook group called Story Driven Games. So if you are interested in stories in games, it's somehow a major community, and we are basically discussing games with stories, discussing how the stories are told, discussing various ways how you can tell a story, and we are working on a release list of upcoming story-driven games. So this is enough about me, and let's talk about my talk. This is the big picture of things I would like to talk to you today, and I'm thinking if I could take the microphone out and not sit down, it would be much more comfortable for me, so sorry about that. Yes, I hate sitting down. Anyway, so this is the big picture, and as you can see, there are a lot of concepts, and the Someday You'll Return game is a game which is very personal to me, and I will be talking about these personal contexts much more even later. So what we see from the left to the right, we can see that there is a Czech, very famous touristic system I will be talking about in large detail. There are very Czech myth and legends and folklore which is going on, so we can see the musicians playing the traditional Moravian music, we can see some scary person which represents the local myth. We can see the excerpt of a herbal book, which is a very traditional thing in the Czech Republic, where people gather herbs and create some teas and some medicine. We can see beautiful Czech nature, and we can see Czech history. So what you see at the bottom of it is a Glagolitic script. I will be talking about it later. It's basically the very first written language in the Czech Republic. And we can see some memories of our childhood. So you can see this summer camp, and we can see some very ancient items we were used to as kids. And that's all of this will basically come clear later when I show you why I'm basically showing you this big picture. And in the middle you see the map of the Czech Republic. It was not true when I was a kid, because it was a Czechoslovakia. It were two countries together, Czech and Slovakia. Then they got separated, and now we have only this Czech part of it. Before I start, I will show you a small trailer so you get a glimpse of what this game is about. And as usual with PowerPoint, I need to do this. want to actually hear the proper version, because this was just one channel playing for some reason, I don't know why, you maybe could listen it at home, and let's talk about the game itself. So, let's first talk about the playground the game is in. We start by two geographical regions, and it has a reason why. So first one, and they are basically positioned in the opposite parts of our country. So one is Hřiby. Now you can try pronounce it. Hřiby. And it's in Moravia, so it's like a southern part of the country. And Czech Switzerland, so-called, is in northern Bohemia. So it's like a northern part of the country. And why those two regions? Basically, I grew up in northern Bohemia and Lukáš grew up in southern Moravia. So basically, we took exactly the regions. We spent years and years of our childhood. We have lots of personal memories. We have lots of very personal experiences from this ground, from stories being told by people there, from the whole kind of culture. And what we did is we basically created a virtual map, because we just created some sort of pseudo-geography, and we interpolated the places from our childhood into this map. And that's because if you think about the real geography, it's very hard to make it playable enough if you just take one-to-one representation. So we created a kind of virtual land, but we kind of populated with places of our childhood. And another thing we were very careful about was that we wanted to have this kind of meaning, have this kind of feeling that you're there. Despite the fact that this place doesn't really exist, you have a feeling that it's basically the Czech country. So this is basically the result, one of our significant shots from very early of the game, where you climb on the peak and you can see, and immediately you can see that they are kind of part of the northern Bohemia from the Czech Switzerland, those stone massifs, but also the forests, they are part of the Moravia. And another thing is that this is not a realistic game in a way of a visuals. We are basically hand painting the textures, so it's all kind of this autumn stylization. So while it looks really nice, it's not realistic. We are not craving for that. But back to the map, so we can see those exact regions here. So if you look up, there are this small village up, is called Koričany, where Lukáš had his cottage, where he spent a lot of kind of summertime. And just below this Hřibska is a village in the northern Bohemia. And this is where my grandmother lived, so I spent time there. So those are the places we are kind of centering the gameplay around. As you progress through the game, you of course kind of find out that it's even in the story-driven sense, it has a meaning why those places are kind of stuck together, but I'm not spoiling that for you. So we have basically our forest, as I call it. So this is basically a very typical view. If you are in the Czech forest, you can see these tourist signs, and you can see the ways and everything. It looks very similar. And one of the main issues we were solving is how to prevent people from getting lost. Because if you are in the city, you have a lot of kind of visual clues, you have like buildings, you have stuff like that. And you can of course put these things into the forest, but you should come with something more clever. And that's when we basically looked into our country and into one of the biggest heritage we have. And this is the tourist system in the Czech Republic. And it's one of the most advanced systems on the planet. And at this point, we have over 42,000 kilometers of fully marked trails. So basically, if you come and are a tourist, you come to the Czech Republic, it's very hard to get lost, because it's so much and so well marked, and by a very sophisticated system that it's really great if you're a tourist and want to go hiking there. Each year, additional 200 kilometers appear. So it's some really work in progress, and it's still being worked on. And as I say, it's really one of the best systems, and I will show you very soon why is it like that. As a fun fact, it dates back to 1888, which is a great year. You can see that you can very easily remember that. I think all the historical events should be placed in such kind of occasions, so you can remember them well. And it was in the Beskid mountain. There is a mountain called Radhošť, and this was the very first place where it appeared. And these days we are basically exporting this tourist system. We are exporting it abroad. So, for example, to eastern parts of Ukraine and Georgia and these kind of lands, they wanted the same system. They want to use this system because it's very clever. I will do a small comparison. For example, if we talk about marked trails and we look into much bigger Hungary, there are only 11,000 marked trails, 11,000 kilometers. In Netherlands, it's 5,000. In Bulgaria, which is also very big, it's only 6,000. So our 42,000 kilometers, if we compare it how small our country is really a unique thing. So this is basically, if you go to our forest, this is basically what you will meet. As you can see up, there are those kind of stripes with the color inside, so they form a path. If you have to turn, there is this kind of arrow sign going, so basically this is what is showing you, this is what is showing you that you should basically turn somewhere. We have these kind of plates where you can see the direction and how many kilometers it takes to get to a certain point and which color to use. Then to the right of that we can see exactly the kind of point of interest, so basically this is which marks the point of interest. And below are some other signs. For example, the blue one means that there is some sort of vista, that you can see some nice point, like a high point. Below it is a castle, a ruin of a castle. Then you have an end of a trail, then you have a special place. And just below the green one, this diagonal one, it's basically that some education trail is starting. So as you can see, we have a lot of these small elements. There is another set for for people who go skiing. Another system for people who go cycling. So as you can see, this is like a whole system in itself, and it's coupled with another elements. So this is how it looks in the real life. It's coupled with these maps, which you can see up, where you can see the marked trails, and it's coupled with these kind of points where there is a crossing, so you can see how it crosses, how it goes to different directions. And of course, it's very often nowadays coupled with these kind of boards, which tells you something interesting about the basically land or about the life which is living there and stuff like that. So it's not one of these things; it's all these elements together which forms this incredible system. Because this is basically, as a whole, if you look at it as all these elements together, it creates very great way how to navigate. So this was the thing which was one of the kind of critical points when our very early prototype, when we started to do the game, we say, okay, we want to have these tourist markings just as a decoration, just as it would somehow resemble the Czech forest. But then when we put it in and we say, okay, let's just basically make it an integral part of the gameplay. Let's just use it as a way how players can navigate. We don't want in our game to have this kind of, HUD thing where you just have some spot and you just follow some arrow without looking around yourself. We just wanted people to experience the forest, experience the views there. So we've decided to go this way and to bring this kind of tourist dimension to it. So if you look, this is a screenshot from the game which I took just before this conference, and we can see that we have a very similar posts and very similar elements. But of course, the places here are half fictional and half real, because as I told you before, this is like a virtual map, so we are not working only with the real world location, but we are basically mixing the real and the kind of created by us. This is another of them, is here, and from the people who are kind of knowledgeable about our country, you would immediately recognize that there are places mixed from the northern Bohemia and southern Moravia here.
But important is that as soon as you basically learn the rules, how to use this system, it's very hard to get lost in the game, because basically all this forest, despite the fact that it has a lot of other visual clues, it's basically guiding you through this color and through this system, and we found out through our playtesting that it works incredibly well, that the people are not getting lost there, that if they are getting lost, it's because they went exploring some more advanced places, and then, you know, of course, not everything in the game is marked. So if you are this exploration type and you can somehow, you know, go and suddenly there is a small crack in the mountain and you can go through it, and then finally you found a whole new area with some secret stuff. But it's not, if you are just going and you want just to follow the trail, you will never get lost because of this system. So this is basically, as I showed you at one of the early screenshots, you can see this is the stripe on the forest, on the tree. So this red one is basically showing that you are following the red line. Another example of usage here is that you should turn here right, or in this case left, because because if you go straight, you would go to a different place. Someday Return is actually not fully open world game, because originally the idea was, let's make it, you know, totally open and let everybody could go when they want. But the problem is that we are, as I told you, just a two-man team, and when we created the first playground, we found out, okay, but there is nothing to do. It's like, yeah, let's make it more kind of concise. So we basically call it a semi-open world, because you still have some level of freedom, but many times are places which are close to you, and there is a system for that. So you basically always find some gameplay or something to do in the game, and not just wander aimlessly in the places where nothing is implemented. And it actually takes us to one of the critical things, because if we are working with a real location and there are real places in the game, how much of it is real? How much of it is fake? And this is very problematic thing with the video games. Because if you go to some of the places in the real world, you find out that if you are as a person, as an avatar in the 3D world, and you are going through these places, it's very small. It's really totally small, and there is really nothing you can do there. So we had to adapt a lot of places to accommodate the gameplay. So what we're trying to do is to maintain the soul, the spirit of the place, maintain some kind of visual resemblance, but a lot of places are basically inflated, because otherwise it will not work as a game. So this is an example. Here you can see on the left an actual photograph. This is like a St. Clement fortress in Hřiby. And at the bottom you can see a screenshot from Someday Will Return. So you can see that it's the same chapel, but as you, for example, see the tower bell, for some reason you would be able to go there. So if it would be so small as in the photograph, you wouldn't be even able to make a step there. So we had to inflate it. And we also basically came up with another ways how to put it into a place that it's more playable. So basically but still, if you look at it, it resembles that. You can see it's like this St. Clement's chapel and this kind of fortress of St. Clement, which is the whole area there you are working with. Another thing is this Kazatelna peak. It's a very ancient one, and here the difference is much more visible, because you can see that in the original there is no hints of northern Bohemia in the photograph. But if you look below, you can see those stone massifs, they are exactly transplanted from the northern Bohemia, so you can see how it changes in the game. And now the question is, okay, so I really love the game, I want to go there, how will I find the place? So we implemented in our game a very special system, that we have some kind of examined spots, and they look like this. So you can try. You have your phones here. So for you who don't have your phones here, I have a surprise. So this is what you would get on your phone. And basically, it's you get opened a tourist map with the exact spot, so you can basically zoom out and find your plan to travel your trip there to these places. And it's connected to Mapy.cz, which is very advanced and probably the best tourist map of the Czech Republic. For example, many places you would not find on the Google, if you look at the Google Maps, but here, all of them we are working with are there, so that's basically the thing. So if you're in the game and suddenly you say, oh, I wish to see this place, or I want to visit the St. Clement Chapel, you just scan the QR code and you just save somewhere the map position, and then you can go visit there. Another thing which we work with are the Infoboards. As you can see, this is an example of an Infoboard, and of course, you shouldn't trust everything you will read there. That's for a reason. But most of the things are real, and this is not any kind of edutainment game. So we are not trying to teach anything in the game, but a lot of factography stuff is real. But sometimes there are some gameplay elements we are basically including in the game, and these elements are not real, but you will be very easily able to distinguish the facts from the fiction, because it's getting really scary what sometimes appears there. Okay, I would like to move to a bit different topic, and this is history, and that's because the place, especially this Hřiby, which is very nice to pronounce, is a place where two people from Thessaloniki came and brought us written language and also a spoken language, the first language. And this is a place which dates back to 9th century, and at that time there was a huge fortress. This is the St. Clement place I was talking about, and this written language was called Glagolitic script, and the language they brought was called Old Slavonic. And these are things which we work actively in the game, despite the fact that it might be a bit, it's like for somebody who is not of the Czech origin, it's basically just some kind of information, but it's connected to the land, and this is what I believe in, that something which is connected to the region, why should we kind of come up with some symbols? For example, if we have some puzzles there and we want to use some symbols, why should we come with some when we have this Glagolitic script? Nobody really, just a few scholars can read it now. So why should we use it? So if we talk about that, there is a very, very culturally rich folklore region. So as I told you, it's coming to 9th century. For our country, it's really ancient. For Italy, it's not. That's life. And that's the main story of those two, the Saint Cyril and Methodius, coming to the Great Moravia back then and bringing the language. And basically, it's like a thriller story a bit, because there is some forgery and some stuff which is very nice. And you will find some books in the game where you can read about that, but it's just very side activity. You don't have to do it. And this Old Slavonic language and Glagolitic alphabet are actively used in the game. And of course, this land was filled with a lot of witchcraft and with herbalism. So these things are one of the core aspects of the game, that you basically mix these religious things from Constantine and Methodius with old pagan rituals which happened in this land. And this land is really rich with myths, legends, and very strange tales. And some of the myths are so weird. I will later give you one funny example, so you would understand how convoluted it is, just these old legends. And we have very nice and unique folklore music there. And this is another thing when I was thinking about the music for the game. And this is a contemporary game, because the game starts with the main player coming with the car, with his smartphone, the GPS tracker on. So it's not that kind of folky. But as you progress through the game, it's like as if you were going back in the time, in a way, and it goes more to the roots of the land and out from this kind of globalized stuff to very specific region things. And some parts of the game actually take place in the caves. And we have in the Czech Republic very interesting cave system called Moravian Crust. It's not exactly in the Hřiby region. It's a bit next to it. It's more to the west. But we are using that. We are using those caves as an illustration of the cave system there. And there we can go a bit more to early ages like Paleolithic and stuff like that. So just to give you an idea, this is another comparison. This is a photograph, and this is a screenshot from one of the caves we all have to crawl through in the game. Okay, so this is the glagolitic script I was talking about before. So this is basically, as you can see, a very strange way how to write letters and also numbers. So when we were looking at that, it was immediately obvious that we should use it somehow. And I will be talking more about how to use it meaningfully when I will be talking about camps and the camp culture in the Czech Republic. So I will be using that. So keep in mind now how it looks like. Keep in mind the shapes and how kind of alien it looks, because if you play some science fiction game and there was some alien race and you see this, you would believe it. You say, okay, it's some aliens, you know, it's their language. It's not, it's very old, it's 9th century glagolitic script. So, just to make it more fun, because I'm saying very, very serious stuff now. So I will give you an example of a folk tale, which we kind of work with in the game, and I made some funny images so you can understand it better. And what is interesting about this folk tale is how it mixes the religious, the paganist, and basically this kind of thing, the clash of two cultures, which happened because it's a very old tale. And I found it in a book which kind of explores old tales, Moravian tales. And it's about the old worker who each Sunday went to the church. And he was very, very religious, and it was like he would never miss any mass. He was always coming to the church. And always, when he came back home, he took his clothes, he threw it to the wall, and they would be just holding there, like this. Just stuck on the wall without any hook, without anything, just holding there. And one of these Sundays, he again came to the church, and he looked out of the window and saw a devil. And the devil was listening to the priest and writing some kind of notes. So this worker, he got really angry, got home, and threw his clothes on the wall, and they fell down. So he got even more angry and was thinking about the most blasphemous things he could do. So he took bread and created basically the shoes out of this bread. And as he walked out, a flaming wild boar came, go under him, and since that time he is going through the Czech Republic forests on this flaming wild boar and is haunting the lands. End of the story. So, as you can see, it starts like a normal story. And as you can also see, it turns into some kind of, let's see, hallucinogenic ideas. But what is interesting in this is that it looks, if you look from outside, but if you start to think about the meanings of individual parts of this story, like of the symbols which are there and which are actually pretty clever, because as I interpreted, if he threw the clothes on the wall, it's probably an allusion to his faith, that he has very strong faith, so it would hold, and stuff like that. If you take the shoes out of the bread, it would probably be something connected that the bread was considered to be a God's gift. So, as you can see, everything works out up till this flaming wild boar. It's totally nonsense, you know, it's very paganistic thing, because this is going back to totally different ideas. It's more like this kind of animalistic stuff. So, and we have really thousands of tales like that. So very nice to work with in the game, because we are just using some of the elements of that, but it's very nice to have this as a color of the culture there. Another thing I would like to show you now is a live example of the music which is basically relevant for the region. I just started, hopefully. I think that's enough just for a color. And I'm showing you this example for a reason, because this day music in games gets somehow globalized in a way, and somehow what we hear often in the games is something which is a product of either pre-made sound banks or some kind of stock music, or even the composers. They often basically have a couple of inspirations from the composers. They just copy the styles and copy the stuff. And what I'm trying to do here in Some Little Return is taking these elements, and not this music exactly, but these elements of the music, and create basically a music which is drawing from the culture, drawing from the old Moravian songs, drawing from the tonality of these songs, of the rhythmics of the songs, and basically not implementing different, just this kind of stock Hollywood ideas, but really drawing from the cultural heritage of the land. And that's something which I would also recommend, because suddenly, when, for example, we released the first teaser and it was just with the old song, and I want to play it to you, I will do it later on, because I'm almost out of time. And and it was very pre-alpha visuals, it was really looking horrible back then, but this song itself immediately turned the media on the head, because everybody's saying, oh, this is something totally different, what is it? And so I would recommend always, look into your country, look into your musical heritage, and work with it. Okay. Another thing I was talking about is the Heuristic System, and this is something we have a very good tradition with, and especially I hated it as a kid, because my mother, she was doing this stuff, and I was forced to do and pick up these plants. And it was like sunny days, and I was always have to go and get them. I hated that. So, come full circle around, and now I'm making a game and I'm using them. And you have to pick it yourself, it's my revenge. And the idea about that is that we have like a very sophisticated system where you have to use special parts of the plants, and either you can crush them or you can just cut them and put them into some kind of recipe. And you have to find the recipes and you have to use them in the game context. But it again comes from my childhood and from my hate to these plant picking and then drying them, and then we find out that they got bad and something. Okay, I'm very bad with time now, so I just switch to this. And I would like to talk about another element which we as a kids had to go through. And these were Czech summer camps. And this is something we are very heavily utilizing in the game, so it's another kind of thing which comes from my childhood. And this thing started in 1912 in forests of Orlov, where this guy called Antonín Benjamin Svojsík, you can try pronounce it again, he started with the first summer camp. And year after, there were already 15 groups of kids trying to survive. The original idea came from England, so we don't have to blame ourselves, we can blame the British. And the idea was to survive in the nature. These days it's totally different because as you can see, there is a lot of kind of games and quests and goals, so it's not this kind of raw survival. When I was a kid, it was more about making a fire and peeling the potatoes. Now it's like, okay, let's take Frozen and make like a Frozen from Disney, this kind of Frozen-based camp for girls or something, you know, I don't know. So in our game, we kind of combine two aspects of that, and we created some kind of meta game, because when you are visiting the camp, it's way after this happened. So you're just finding some kind of remains of the game which was played there. But it's an ideal place how to put the history there. So what we did is we basically spin the whole game around this Cyril and Methodius thriller story, because there was this witching who was basically faking the glade, faking the paper from Pope and bringing it somewhere, and then it was like imprisonment and stuff like that. This was a hardcore detective story, basically what happened there. And we spun this around that time, and we also implemented some kind of other things like Inquisition and stuff, some funny other things around that. Almost every kid of my generation went through that, so it's like a very, very common. And when I was talking with some people, for example, from the United States, they were totally horrified. And I think a lot of stories, not even there, but even in our country now, would end at courage. Because it was really, you know, if somebody got hurt back then, nobody cares. It was like, yeah, he got hurt, you know, he was clumsy. So the way how we have it now and how they have it in US for many years is that everybody would be now, you know, screaming, prosecuting and whatever. And in our, you know, when we were kids, it was just, yeah, you know, just got hurt because he was clumsy, and nobody would just, you know, care about that. So that's something we basically show. And now I want to show you another two videos. This is how the game looked many years ago. I'm sorry, it doesn't make sense because just one channel and there is half of the music missing, and I will just skip this and I will play the other one, which is this one. And it has the contemporary visual system. So this is the summer camp, and you would not probably understand the character because he's in the other channel. So this is the caves in action. This is how we climb in the game. So as I promised, I wanted to tell you a bit more about how we use these summer camps, as you can see in this second trailer. One of the part of these camps was something which was called the Path of Courage, and it was something which was like a culmination of each of these camps where kids were sent alone to the dark forest, and they would have to go to graveyard, to some funny places, just to prove that they are courageous enough. And they were usually going alone. They could sometimes have a flashlight, sometimes not. And basically, along the way, there were some of the instructors scattered, and sometimes they make this kind of scary sounds or stuff. So this was like an idea of the best culmination of this camp. And these all elements are in a way twisted in Someday You'll Return. So there is nothing totally random there. You know, all these elements we are working there are coming from our childhood, coming from these exact regions we spent our childhood in. And as a funny part, today is, if I look in retrospective how it was, I think it's an experience I would not change in a way, because it's so many things which I can't do. For example, with my kids, I can't let them, you know, do this. They can't be like this, and in certain sense, they are missing some of these darker parts of this childhood. So anyway, in our game we are working, as I told you, with the history. We are working with the glagolitic script in the puzzles, and it's all interwoven into these camp games. So basically, as you are forced at certain point of the game to replay some of these scary games, these camp games, you basically can learn a bit, or don't have to. It's not necessary. I told you it's not edutainment, but you can learn more about our history, about how the things were, how basically these camps were structured, what happened there. So these all informations are like a side thought, but they are real. And if you play the game, you can basically relive these things. So I think it's a good time to have some questions. If you're interested in the game itself, this is the link for the Steam, so you can put it to wish list, so someday you will return there. And I would like to see if you have any questions. Thank you.
Qualche curiosità, ecco, vedo una tua mano alzata alla metà.
Do you have any kind of tracking in order to know how many people have used the QR code and visited several places in order to have results?
Thank you. It's a great question. We don't, and that's for a reason which is very personal to me. I personally think that a lot of things we are living through is intimate, it's personal. I don't want to track it. Because I go to a concert or I play at a concert and I see all these people just holding their phones to put it on the Facebook. And that's a very similar thing. And for me, I'm showing you in the game a landscape. I'm showing you beautiful places. I'm showing you very interesting and intriguing history. And it's up to you if you want to go there or not. And I'm not personally interested in if you will or not. So for me, I know this is totally non-2009-ish, 19-ish, because it's, you know, nowadays everything should have some tracking cookies and everything should just, you know, gather data and then analyze data and use neural network to analyze data. But in this case, this is such a personal project to me. A lot of stories in the game, a lot of fears I put into this game. So if I would start to apply this kind of cold logic and start to just gather some information from people, I'm not. It would totally break what I'm doing or trying to do.
Altre domande? Ultima fila.
Are there a lot of scare jumps?
Jump scares? No. This game is not built upon cheap things. There are some parts where you can get startled, but it's not basically the worst thing in this game are not the scary things on the screen, but when you realize the interpersonal relationships in the game and how people are able, and not some, some killer, some murderer. No, how normal me and you, how we are able to treat each other. I think that's the worst part of the game. I think this is what will make the biggest kind of unsettling feeling when you will go through very kind of normal yet ugly things.
Do you expect, given that Greek mythology, Nordic mythology was widely used in mainstream video games and books and so on, do you expect that exploiting local folklore and local mythology may get some, it gets used more because people discover this kind of folklore and they start building on that. So do you expect this to be some sort of starting point for example, Eastern mythology and so on? Or are you only working for, as you said, this is your experience, your story, and you just want to share it?
Yeah, actually, I see, especially in Eastern Europe, that these things were even exploited much more way before the Someday Return. And I'm not talking about the big games like The Witcher, for example, or like Kingdom Come Deliverance, which takes place in the Czech in the Czech lands in the Bohemia. But especially, for example, I've been to a couple of conferences in Russia, and for them this is like a normal way how they narrate. They draw a lot from their stories, from their tales. Just those games are not the games you see on Kotaku or PC Gamer. So they just slip under your radar. You just don't see them. But for me personally, this was a big switch because our last game, Julia Among the Stars, was set in space, so it's a bit far from the Chřiby. But there was something I realized about the story, and I realized that while the story is accepted and people love it, for me personally today, I'm a bit in a different position, and I'm building much more intimate and personal things. And that's not only about the video games, it's also about music, about other things I'm doing. So this was a starting point for me to understand that why go to a different solar system when we have such a rich treasure trove of stories, treasure trove of experience here. And maybe if I make the next game in space, it will be based upon my experiences from these lands. But this is what I'm trying to say, that we have such a huge paradigm set here, and I don't think it's enough basically explored, because I see a lot of games with these kind of global conflicts, like let's save the world, let's win the war, but I'm more and more inclined to solve very intimate and very personal stuff. So like my stories are getting more and more chamber. That's basically what I'm trying now, where I am now. Maybe next year I will do some Tetris, it will be easier.
Se non ci sono altre domande, thank you.
Thank you so much.